Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Setting the Scene for MEL Implementation. My name is Kat Goldsworthy and I'm a Research Fellow here at the Evidence and Evaluation Support Team at aifs. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nations, who are the traditional owners of the lands in Melbourne, where I'm speaking to you from. I also pay respects to traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to lands and waters. We pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures and to elders past and present. Today's webinar is part of a series designed to share examples of evaluative practice and ideas for collecting and using evidence in the context of Australian Child and Family Services. The format is a little bit different to our usual webinar program. We're doing a brief 30-minute conversation style between myself and a guest, just to provide a bit of an overview around an evaluation topic. So my guest today, I'm happy to introduce, is Emily McDonald, who is a Senior Evaluation Officer here at aifs and a colleague of mine. Our discussion is going to focus on how to implement monitoring, evaluation and learning approaches so that we get the evidence that we need. And for anyone new to monitoring, evaluation and learning, or MEL as we will be referring to it throughout this discussion, we're essentially talking about a coordinated approach to collecting data, making judgments about what worked, who it worked for and why, and learning from the evidence that you're generating. So MEL is a massive topic. We absolutely cannot cover it in any great detail in this 30-minute webinar, and we will not be getting into specifics around how to actually create and use MEL. That would be, a couple of days session, I think. But if that is something that you're interested in, please look at our step-by-step interactive MEL guide. We've linked to that in your handouts. That's a guide that we've recently published. It was commissioned by the Department of Social Services and it's primarily aimed at child and family services, but it'll be relevant to many, many others. So before we dive into our discussion, I do have a little bit of housekeeping to cover. This webinar has been pre-recorded, which means there is no live Q&A element. And for those of you who require captions, please watch the webinar via the aifs website. There is a link in the chat and a full transcript will be available. We will have some related readings and resources available in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. So please access those during or after the webinar. And, we'll link to any further resources we think are relevant. And because we're evaluators, there will be a short feedback survey at the end of the webinar, and we'd be really grateful for you to take some time and respond to that survey. Okay, all housekeeping out of the way, let's begin. Emily, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really great to have you here. I'm really interested to be picking your brain around MEL implementation today. And I want to start the conversation by asking you, from your perspective, what makes a MEL approach different from the routine data collection and reporting that most of us do day to day?
Sure. Thanks, Kat. So look, as you were saying, MEL's a continuous process. It has three components. The first is to monitor and measure the implementation of your program, gaining those insights into what's working, what's not. And that also includes the kind of unintended insights that you might gather. The second is about evaluating your data and your insights, making those judgments, as you said before. And finally, it's about learning, and this relates to the kinds of changes and adaptations that are important to make from looking at your outcomes. So I guess I always think about MEL as, doing MEL and using MEL as a continuous kind of a process, but it's different to just collecting and reporting data because it's specifically tailored to your own program and also your community. So, and I guess the way that it's good to kind of tailor your plans, your MEL plans, and design your plan is to start with a theory of change or a program logic process, because that really helps you to identify your end of program goals, what you're trying to achieve, and then it's you working backwards about all of the kinds of activities and practices that you're going to need to implement in order to achieve those outcomes. So once you've got that theory of change, you're able then to work out a kind of a measurement and a strategy plan. So that's how it's quite different to just collecting and reporting data.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that makes sense. It's like as organizations, we get together, we have that theory of change, and we decide sort of what's important and what needs to be prioritized, and then develop a plan
Yeah,
sort of based on that.
correct.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I've already said that I'm not going to be talking about how to actually create a MEL because it's quite complicated and it'll be different for every organization. But I am really interested in how we set ourselves up to do it well. And I guess what I
Mm,
mean by that is, I'm talking about the systems, the practices, the processes that actually enable us to move a MEL approach from theory into
mm,
action. And,
mm,
that can be a bit tricky.
mm.
And I know you're interested in this. You've got some experience in doing it, Emily. Tell us why you think this element is important.
Sure. Look, I guess if you're thinking about the purpose of MEL as having visibility on how your program is performing, so, getting a little performance story for yourself in a continuous way, it's really then important to be able to be confident that you have a story that represents what's really happening. So it's about the quality of the story and also the quality of your MEL data. And I guess what we know about research into implementation is that the kind of successful uptake of new practices in organisations needs more than just training. It requires a set of different processes and some structure in place to help you to know that you're on track. So these are the kinds of processes and structures that help you answer questions like, uh, whether am I actually getting the data that I need to have? Is data being collected? It also helps you to know whether your practitioners have integrated the MEL practice into their own practice with service users. And the other thing it really does, which is great, is it actually gives practitioners an opportunity to be able to tell you or program managers whether the process that you've put in place for your MEL is actually feasible for your consumers and your practitioners. So it's a great process to kind of track. Um, the other great thing I like about having a more structured approach to implementation is it allows the implementation to be shared across a number of people in an organisation, not just sitting with one person in an organisation to implement a MEL. Like, for example, your internal evaluator. It starts the process with a group of people implementing your MEL from the start, which is really going to lead to more success, basically. Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. I'll just kind of pick up on a couple of points you said. I think it is refreshing that, because when you think about creating monitoring and evaluation plans, it often is there's someone sort of leading the charge around, building that sort of plan and putting all the information together and
Yeah.
thinking about how it works. So it's refreshing to know that actually doing the work maybe doesn't lie with one person and
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
supposed to be part of a broader collaborative effort because it can be a huge amount of work.
It's huge, yeah. So, and it actually needs lots of different levels to it, the implementation. So it does actually need kind of oversight, and it needs to be able to kind of be gathering the data along those levels. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying to just some of the things that I heard you say too is around having structure actually
Mm,
around how
mm,
we implement MEL and
mm.
turn that plan into action. So it's very intentional, it's very purpose, there's
Yeah.
structure, and we're potentially talking about developing some new practices that people might have to get their head around in order to implement the MEL and get the data that they need to learn from. So I know you're going to be talking a little bit more about that in a minute. I'm curious, in the context of all of this, where should organisations actually start? We're talking about implementation processes here, and it is quite separate to actually creating the MEL, right? As I've said, there's structures, there's processes, there's systems. Like, where do organisations start to building these things?
Sure, yeah, good question. I mean, I feel that well, first of all, that goes to kind of the design of your MEL and who is involved in the design of the MEL. And I'll probably talk a little bit about that later, but I do think it's a good idea to have a broad range of people involved in the design of the MEL. And those people usually end up then being the people who are going to be helping with the implementation, that are forming an implementation team. So it's probably a good idea to have in mind implementation strategies, and particularly who is going to be involved while you're designing, just to have it in mind. But it usually works out that it will be the same kind of crew of people in the organisation who are involved in both. Yeah.
Would you just, I'm going to jump in, would you do these things side by side then? If you're in the process of developing a MEL, given the implementation, there's a bit of a crossover, I guess, between the teams that might be involved in both. Are these activities that you do at the same time, or does one follow the other?
I think you've got to design your MEL first, because there's a lot to be thinking about, and then come up with a good implementation plan that aligns to the design of your MEL. I think that's important. I guess the reason why I'm talking about the importance of implementation just being in mind is more around the who is involved, the roles, and the people and the stakeholders. So really thinking quite broadly around, who do we need to design, help us to design this so it reflects the program, and sometimes that's also going to involve service users in terms of like co-designing. But definitely kind of thinking about those roles of who in the future is going to be implementing, I think is important.
Yeah, that makes sense. So,
Yep.
kind of always having it there in the background, that you're going to be
Yeah.
doing this, next in the future.
Yep.
So you were talking about implementation teams around where should organizations start. Is that being sort of the place that you start?
It is, yeah. You start with an implementation team, gathering the people, as I've said, who are going to, I guess, have the most visibility over what needs to be implemented, and these are a group of people that are going to be working together in a team over a period of time of the implementation. So it does take a little bit of resources. It's important when you're gathering your implementation team to be able to be thinking about those different roles of the team, and thinking about the particular kind of, I guess, governance areas, how a decision's going to be made with the implementation team, and who is going to play what role. And I guess the next stage after that is to develop your plan together as a shared group. And so that's a plan that has strategies and activities that will help you to know that your MEL is being implemented. Then I think after that, I think it's a good idea. Sometimes it's useful to kind of work backwards, because you have to kind of have some indicators for yourself around what does good implementation look like in our organisation. So implementation is kind of tracked in the same way as we track MEL. So we are receiving feedback about implementation, and we're tracking kind of information. We're tracking information about barriers, information about things that are going well with the implementation of the MEL, and we're adapting as we go. So it's a similar process to MEL itself. So you really do need to have a conversation among the group, first of all, around what kinds of indicators would tell us that we are doing a good job at implementing our MEL. What would tell us? And sometimes that's just things like, okay, so our practitioners and our team leaders are telling us that actually the MEL design is a really good fit and it's feasible for their work. It's easy to integrate into their practice, and we're getting really good feedback from our service users. So that might be an indicator that your implementation is going well. Other organisations might say, well, actually, we'd like to know just in the first kind of section of implementation that 60% of our families in the first go are actually using the tools. And we're getting 60% of our families to be involved in our MEL. So there's different indicators there that tells teams, implementation teams, how your implementation is going, but you've got to decide what those indicators are. Yeah.
No, sorry, you go on. I'll ask questions later.
Sure. So I guess, and to be able to kind of get to that stage, you do need to kind of consider the kind of readiness of your kind of process, yeah? And so what you're doing there is you're checking in with the kinds of structures and the processes that you've got in place in order to implement this particular practice change. So have you got the resources to train staff around the implementation of the MEL? Have you got local champions that are going to be able to provide feedback to the implementation team in place? Have you got IT systems that are fit for purpose, that align to the way that you're collecting data, and are all in place for people to be able to use? So there's some of the kind of readiness implementation plans, thinking about the kinds of structures you need and processes and readiness pieces.
And I guess having the implementation team, they're the group that are responsible for assessing that and then potentially building that readiness and finding those opportunities to build readiness where they are.
Absolutely. It's not just training, see you later. It's very much tracking the kind of implementation and getting feedback about how it's going and changing it as you go. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I can see where you're getting at, where you're saying, monitoring, like looking at the implementation of your MEL is very similar to a MEL process. Because I guess what I heard you say in all of that, such interesting, I think, insights for our audience about how to do this work. But what I heard you say was, you do need some kind of a plan, right? It's like, what do we want to get out of the implementation? What do we want to monitor? What are the kinds of what do we want our MEL to do, and how will we know that it's doing what we want to do? And you need some kind of a plan to have visibility to know what to prioritize as well, right? Because you could look at so many different aspects of implementation, and it's trying to find what are the important things that we really need to build structures around and systems around and actually monitor it, and then having the people feeding into the process, getting the data from staff internally around, like, is this working? Isn't it? What's going on? So that you can actually respond in real time as you're implementing the MEL to address any issues that come up. That sort of agility, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think one of the kind of things that, because it can feel overwhelming, implementing something like a MEL or a new program, but in this case a MEL. I think the important thing is to choose the kinds of strategies and activities that will have kind of most leverage in your organisation, that are not too kind of taxing for people or burdensome for people. And I guess you're kind of looking for strategies that are strategically kind of useful for practitioners to take up quickly. So, you're already gaining, most organisations are already gaining a lot of information through their review processes and through their supervision process. So you're kind of just bouncing off those types of processes that you've already got in place. The key is to try and really make it as simple as possible so that you can have most impact. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about that because you're right. Like, even in my own line of work, we do have routine ways that we kind of come together, we talk to each other. And, we obviously do our own monitoring and evaluation work here at aifs and in our evidence and evaluation team. And I think we do have a way of just adding something extra to something that we're already doing to
Yeah.
collect a certain kind of feedback to make sure that, are the surveys going out in the way that we want to? Are people actually responding to those surveys? Do we have an avenue to talk about those things? And is there someone responsible to actually action that? Is there going to be some kind of follow up and then continued monitoring of how that's going? But certainly I can see how organizations would have existing structures already that you could just build on.
Yeah.
Um, are
Yeah.
there particular strategies that you have seen work well in organizations around implementation of MEL?
Yeah, I mean, there's ones that are quite common, and like I said, these are ones that most organisations are already doing. So why not use them to add a different element in having kind of your implementation strategies incorporated in them. So ones like local champions that are identified people who work on teams who can be the link between the team and the implementation team. So feeding those kind of barriers and good stories back about the implementation. And also just things like kind of coaching techniques are important, or community of practices that organisations may already be doing on a kind of a monthly basis to add an item in there around feedback and collecting qualitative and perhaps quantitative data around how the implementation's going. Sometimes people kind of embed processes actually into supervision. So having like a routine kind of check-in, again, it's just one little item to add into supervision where you can ask practitioners, how are we going with the implementation of the tools? Is it fit for purpose? Do you think they're working? What kind of feedback have you got for us? That can be kind of something that people can do. People have sometimes a kind of a review process. So lots of organisations have 6 weekly review processes around, for example, the kind of goals of what consumers are working towards. Again, that 6 weekly review process is another really great place to kind of just pop in a conversation around how the implementation is going, to feed back data to the implementation team. Some organisations, bigger ones, might have like a clinical kind of governance team of supervisors that get together to talk about strategy and talk about implementation. They can be a good place also to leverage off. And finally, some organisations just actually use kind of a data-informed continuous improvement process. So they might already be using, tools where they can turn practice into data and track that. But they're like, you don't have to do that. You can actually just do those simpler forms to gather data and information about how your implementation's going. Yeah,
I love that. I think, yeah, keep it. The more simple you keep it, the easier it is for everyone.
totally.
And, it goes back to that point before of it maybe not feeling so overwhelming to do this implementation work. If you kind of start with what are we already doing and how do we leverage that? Um,
Yeah,
I was kind of thinking as you were talking about, it was kind of becoming very clear to me, I suppose, how important that readiness piece is because,
yeah,
you, in order to have these kinds of strategies that you're talking about working well, like, using supervision and, coaching techniques or using local champions, all of those kinds of things, you obviously need the templates there for those people to be collecting the information that you actually need to collect. Like, if you're in
Mm,
supervision, for example, something needs to guide that conversation around what
mm,
questions are being asked and how do we record what's
mm,
happening in the implementation. So I guess from the outset, we kind of need to have some visibility of what is it that we're going to be looking for and how we're going to build that into those conversations so that you
mm,
can collect a data that's useful for the implementation team.
mm,
And I was just also thinking about how important it would be for whoever's in that implementation team to have good visibility over, what existing things are in place to make it as easy as possible, particularly on
mm,
practitioners who are often doing the frontline work,
mm,
and they're responsible for doing all the testing and thinking about what's
mm,
going on and looking at everything and feeding it back, right? That
mm.
readiness bit's so important.
Totally, totally. And like readiness and also engaging practitioners into the whole process. So, really, ideally, what you will have done in terms by the time you get to implementing your MEL is that your practitioners do understand the kind of rationale, the value, and the merit of actually having a MEL in the first place. So they've kind of got like I guess an attachment, if you like, to the whole process of MEL and why it's so important, why and what it means, and they've got an understanding of how you can adapt practice and programs in order to get better outcomes for service users. So practitioners are more likely to I guess, support the implementation of a MEL in a kind of a more effective way if they've understood the value and even if they've been a part of the process to develop the MEL. I think that that's a really key strategy. Um, so, I mean, so ideally, you will have developed a theory of change with your team because what you want is you want their kind of experiential and experience integrated into your MEL anyway. That's like gold information for the design of your theory of change. So if you've got them kind of on board throughout the process of both your theory of change, your design of your MEL, and then your implementation, you're really set. Even if you've run your program for a really long time, it's time to kind of have a kind of a theory of change exercise to really hone in what people are doing. It can actually be a great way to start the implementation of your MEL, having a really shared kind of agenda around what you're trying to achieve in the first place. Yeah,
Yeah, those workshops are so powerful. I've been involved in doing lots of theory of change work, and they're so powerful. People come on board. You hear about all of this stuff from all of these different perspectives that you never would if you didn't involve everyone in that process.
they're
Um,
incredibly rich. Yeah,
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 yeah. And
yeah.
I love that sentiment of just getting everyone who, the key people are attached to programs involved in like the design of monitoring and evaluation processes,
Mm,
planning, implementation, because you can't have one without the other. One doesn't work without the other. You
yeah.
need those key perspectives. And it's reminding me, we did a webinar probably last year or the year before now about, I'm going to get it wrong now. It's about a routine outcomes measurement tool. And basically, the evaluators, I think they were from Centacare, I'm probably gotten that wrong, but the evaluators were working in tandem with the program managers and the practitioners to develop this tool, implement it, and refine the process. And it was, I
Brilliant.
mean, people should go and listen to that webinar if you want a real life example of what this looks like, because
Yeah.
it was so brilliant. It led to such rich insights around what was working, what wasn't working. Because the thing on the page, it doesn't, you can have the best
Mm.
ideas and it doesn't always work in practice, and you need visibility over that. And it was just such a beautiful example of how that worked together. And those teams became really close as well and kind of developed a shared understanding of each area of work, which is sort of an unintended, benefit of the whole
Yeah.
project.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
think we're probably about out of time, Emily. This
Okay.
conversation has gone. If you've got any last comment, anything you want to add that we didn't get to comment on, please go
I,
ahead.
Yeah, look, the only thing I'd kind of add is there's a whole bunch of great implementation frameworks out there. They are really good kind of project plans. They run like project plans, so you do need a little bit of architecture to kind of roll your plan out. And so have a look at all of the implementation frameworks out there. And finally, I probably would just reiterate that kind of last point that finding the smallest thing that you can find in terms of your strategies in order to have visibility, the biggest kind of visibility over your implementation. That's probably how I'd emphasize. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Lots of rich stuff that you shared. Really, really appreciate it. I'm sure that our audience has really benefited from the practical tips that you've shared. We obviously also have the MEL guide for anyone that is interested in learning more about monitoring, evaluation and learning. And that is a step-by-step interactive guide to help people get their heads around this work and set up a MEL for their own organisations. So thank you. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Kat. Great.
We'll wrap it there. I will also just thank you very much to everyone who came along and listened to this webinar. Thanks very much to the aifs communications team, especially Erin, for making all of this work so beautifully, and of course the Child and Family Evidence team. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the Evidence and Evaluation Support newsletter via the aifs website. We'd really appreciate it if you would fill in the survey at the feedback survey via email. It will take about 1 minute, and the feedback absolutely helps us to improve this webinar program. We really look forward to joining you at our next webinar. So take care and we'll see you soon.